Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Siladi. I'm the conference minister of the Connecticut Conference of the United Church of Christ, and we want to thank you for joining us for this live webinar. The title of the webinar is How Are the Children? Advocating for the Human Rights of Palestinian Children. I'm joined today by three guests who are part of the PIN network, which we'll talk about in a minute. Nancy Boldt McLaren, Dean Ahlberg, and Allie Perry, and we're really glad you're here for this conversation. So I'd like to start out with some introductions if we could, and we'll go Nancy, Dean, and Allie in that order. So Nancy, would you introduce yourself and tell our viewers why you're engaged in this particular justice work?
Hi, good morning. My name is Nancy Boldt McLaren, and I'm the Minister for Faith Formation and Discipleship at Storrs Congregational Church. I've been actively engaged in this work since my first trip to Palestine in 2015. And as I believe Dean and Allie and Kent will agree, once you've been there, you can't not be engaged in the work. So that's my primary reason is as an ally, as a support, and as a person who recognizes the depths of issues and complicity that the U.S. has to grapple with.
Thank you, Nancy. Dean, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Dean Ahlberg. For 29 years, I've served as senior minister at the First Church of Christ Congregational in Reading Center, Connecticut. I have been to Israel-Palestine 4 times, first in 1995, pre-wall, pre-separation wall, and then again in 2012, 2013, and 2014. And those last 2 trips, I brought members of my congregation on an alternative tourism experience. And I agree with Nancy. Once you've been there and seen the realities on the ground, you have really no choice but to be concerned and engaged with issues of justice and faith in Israel-Palestine. We've hosted twice members of the Bethlehem community, Christian community at our church, and they put on demonstrations of the arts and food and music for not just our congregation, for our community. And so that's why I'm engaged.
Thank you, Dean. And Allie, would you introduce yourself, please, and why you're engaged in this work?
Yes, thank you, Ken. I'm Allie Perry, and I'm the worship coordinator at Shalom United Church of Christ in New Haven. And I first traveled to Israel and Palestine in 2008 with Rabbis for Human Rights North America. And my experience there, it was eye-opening and heart-rending because for the first time I came to appreciate what life was like for Palestinians under the Israeli occupation, which I hadn't really understood. I thought this had been a conflict between equals, and I understood that was not accurate, that this was an occupation somewhat like when in Jesus' time with the Romans occupying Palestine. And since then, I've traveled 3 more times on delegations. And as I think Nancy and Dean have both been suggesting, once you see, you can't unsee. Or as Vincent Harding, who I traveled with in 2012, said, once you know, you owe. To see the suffering, the human rights abuses, and the matrix of control that Israel uses against the Palestinian people really calls us as Christians to respond to those abuses and to work for justice. So I've been engaged in this work ever since.
Thank you all for the introduction. I'd like to clarify with you all, first of all, who is UCC PIN and what does UCC PIN represent and who does UCC represent? Can someone in the group answer that question?
So Ken, I'm happy to speak to that because I'm currently on the steering committee of the UCC Palestine Israel Network, which is a network that was started in 2012 by, really inspired by Gay Harder, who's now here in Connecticut, a UCC member, and Baron Cook. They were both very active on this issue in their own congregations, their own communities, and they really saw the need for nationally in the UCC to have a group that was organizing and focused on this issue. And so they started the Palestine Israel Network. And since 2012, that network has expanded. So now there are like 350 members. It's led by a steering committee of 21 people currently. I chair the steering committee at this point. Those 21 people actually represent folks from 12 conferences. So it's clearly national. And our mission is to pray for and boldly work for justice for Israelis and Palestinians, to address the issues there and to be engaged in working for justice and equal rights. So it's a network open to anybody in the denomination. Our work since then has involved supporting resolutions, and most recently a resolution that passed at the General Synod in 2017, which relates to the topic of today's webinar. That resolution is called, calls the United Church of Christ to advocate for the rights of children living under Israeli military occupation. And that passed overwhelmingly, like 75% of the delegates at the 2017 General Synod supported the resolution, which now becomes national policy for the UCC. And specifically, it calls for, among other things, calls for Israel to adhere to the UN Convention on the Rights of Children. It also calls for the United States to withhold its funding. It gives Israel now, the United States, $3.8 billion a year. Most of that is military support. And it calls for withholding that funding because of the abuses of children, the Palestinian children. And then it also calls for members of the United Church of Christ across the nation and congregations to study this issue, to get engaged. And it's because of that that the Palestine-Israel Network and the Steering Committee has developed the video that we're here to talk about, How Are the Children?
So let's talk about the video a little bit. Why did the PIN Network decide to make this particular video titled, How Are the Children?
Well, it was inspired in large part. I mean, our goals after Synod were to say, all right, we want to take seriously the call for us to be engaged in educating people across the nation in the UCC. And it seemed like the best way to do that was to develop a curriculum. And one of the key elements of a curriculum would be a video, because in some ways you have to see this. You can't just read about it. You have to really see what the abuse looks like. And a video provides opportunities. And for people who look at this video, they'll see this footage from various films, there are photographs that document the kind of abuse that's going on of Palestinian children throughout the occupied territories. And so Tom Beilman, who's a member of our steering committee, came up with the idea, convened a subgroup of our steering committee, and they, since last spring, have worked on and developed the film, which now is in 2 parts, and we can get into what the content is. But it really seemed like that was going to be the most effective tool for helping to educate and envision people studies issue, and that it would be easy to distribute and easy to show and help to really deepen people's understanding. And it's accompanied by a website as well. So it's very accessible. People can go on the website, they can get the video, they can show it in their own congregations.
Great. So I'd be interested in each of you responding to this question, and that is, you've seen the video, obviously, and what part of the video is the most compelling for each of you as people of the PIN Network? Nancy, you want to start? What's compelling for you?
Unmuting myself. Oops. There we go. Yes, I would like to share that, well, we actually had a conversation, Dean, Allie, and I, about our shared experiences of watching this video. And each of us commented on the incredibly horrifying atmosphere of terror and dread that the entire community experiences when a child is detained or taken from their family overnight and taken away to a separate part of the geography beyond the boundaries that their parents are allowed to visit. The separation policy is truly and really unbelievable. So I found it most compelling to see how incredibly terrifying, and how the atmosphere of terror is so pronounced and has such a large ripple effect. That was the piece that struck me the most, having not actually experienced an arrest while I was in Palestine, but knowing a lot of families who have experienced arrest and who live in fear of that happening to their child.
Thank you, Nancy. Dean, would you talk a little bit about the video and what's compelling to you about the video?
Well, when I was in Israel, Palestine, a couple of different times, when we were traveling by bus in the West Bank, we were stopped and soldiers boarded our bus just to see who we were. And to have a fully armed automatic weapon, a soldier walk past one is disturbing and unsettling. And I can't imagine how that impacts a 12 or 14-year-old or 15-year-old in the middle of the night in their own home. The lasting image and terror that evokes and elicits from within anyone is just hard to imagine. And I see my youth group kids in those spaces, and so that puts flesh and blood to this resolution and reveals and sheds light on the military courts that are adjudicating these kids, so to speak. I'm not sure I think I'd use that word in the way we understand it when you have a 99% conviction rate and forced confessions from these children, and held beyond their parents' ability to see, no lawyers, no parents. And so I don't know. I just think it's a difficult thing for people to understand here, and this video helps us to get a grasp in some way of how awful. I also would say that as a parent, it struck me the disempowerment of a parent, and not to be able to protect or to help your child, and the ripple effect of that throughout a community where whose kid is next becomes a concern and a question. And the video mentions the overprotectiveness that elicits in parents, and just the unhealthy disruption of normal family and community life that is a ripple effect of this very intentional policy by the Israeli military.
Thank you, Dean. And Allie, for you, what's the most compelling thing about this particular video?
So one of the children featured on the video is Ahed Tamimi. And when I was traveling and visiting in 2012, I met Ahed. At the time, she was 12 years old. And I was a guest overnight in her home. I met her parents, Basim and Nariman Tamimi. And I met her brothers, and I met other members of the family. So for me, when I see her picture, it's very personal. On Facebook, friends with her parents, it feels like they're friends. And I've actually subsequently seen footage when there was a night raid in their home, and I thought, I've been there. I've been inside that home. I've seen that, and the footage of that particular film showed several Israeli soldiers heavily armored coming in the middle of the night, and then you can see children, the members of the family, sort of shaking and quivering. And so it becomes very real for me. And I think the word terror is exactly right to describe what's happening. And I think that's with intention. These night raids are coming in, they're documenting children, getting names of children who then get accused of things like stone throwing. And for me, what's important to understand is this is happening all the time. Because I have Facebook friends that are now Palestinians, I'm hearing about things that are happening right now in real time. But as Dean said, the way in which parents become powerless because they have no access to the kids when they're arrested, they're taken away, as Nancy said. The conviction rate is 99%. They don't have anybody with them. They don't have a lawyer. But to me, the powerlessness of the parents to protect their children, that's a primary responsibility of parents, and these parents are not able to do it.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about this video, and there is a link on the Facebook page to the video. So all you have to do is click on it so that you, as a viewer, can access the video and watch it for yourself. But let's talk about your hope for the video being shown, where the video might be shown? Who is it suitable for? Is there an age group that is this age restricted in your minds about who should view the video? So tell me a little bit, I should say, about, you know, where the video should be shown, how the video should be shown, and who's it suitable for.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Thanks, Kent. For sure, there are a lot of disturbing images in this film. I would suggest that children under the age of 16 wouldn't be the primary target audience for watching this video. It's not so much that it's so graphic, but it's truly distressing to see. It's like we were talking about children separated from their parents in that way. So for sure, there needs to be sort of a warning for people who are watching it that there are distressing images. That said, it's a really important video for folks who are engaged in this work, or who are hoping to be led to engagement in this work, to watch this video in a group context. I think it's something that you can access on your own, but would be fabulous for group learning together. To give an example, my church, Storrs Congregational, will be watching this, and as part of a follow-up to having studied the Kairos Palestine document to learn a little bit about the issues in Palestine from a Christian perspective, particularly. It doesn't have to be a follow-up to another study, although it's helpful to have a little bit of context. So for sure, it's a video that we would recommend watching and discussing with others. And we also have an opportunity for UCC clergy and lay friends to come and watch the video with us on April 30th at the Palestine Museum in Woodbridge, Connecticut. There's some more information about that, I believe, on the Facebook feed here. So that's my sense, is that it's best to watch in groups and with a group who's engaged in exploring this issue further over the age of 16.
Great. Other, Allie or Dean, about where, how? Thank you, Nancy, for the answer.
Well, I'll speak just briefly.
Thank you.
So I agree with Nancy that ideally it should be seen in the group, so what folks can debrief together about what they've experienced, because it is, parts of it are hard to watch, and it's a difficult subject. But also, in terms of planting seeds in our congregation leadership, I sent the link out to our church council and to members of our outreach committee, so that they, at their own leisure and their own convenience, can spend, it's more than an hour to see both parts. And so just for pragmatic reasons, I've given them the option to see it on their own, and then we will come back together, having had that opportunity, and then discern among ourselves how best to expose the congregation to this information and to see this in a more communal setting. So that's just the way that I've handled it initially. Just flexibility, which is nice.
So I would add that the video is part of a curriculum. And so if people go to the website, which is, I think maybe it's being shown, it's hatcnow.org, howardthechildren.org. And that has other materials for people to follow up. But the goal of this really is to have people study and then get engaged and be able to advocate for the rights of Palestinian children. The video is done in 2 parts, and the first one is like 49 minutes, and the second one is like 30 minutes. So people want to, if it's being shown in a congregation, do that in 2 sessions, or as Dean's suggesting, have people watch it individually and then come together to talk about it. I want to say a little bit more about the content of the video, because in addition to showing footage and giving some background and context for Israel's occupation and the fact that Palestinian children, unlike Israeli children, are all, in terms of the justice system, they're all under military control and military courts. And I think it's true that Israel is the only country in the world where children are prosecuted, Palestinian children are prosecuted in military courts. But in addition to showing that and giving information about that, our national leaders are also represented in this film at Speak. They're interviewed. So John Dorhauer, Jim Mose, Tracy Blackman, and Peter McCurry from Global Ministries all interviewed and speak on the videos, as does Lauren McGrail, who's recently returned from being a mission co-worker in Israel and Palestine, working with the YWCA of Palestine. So each of them speaks a little bit about their own experiences of having been in Israel and Palestine, of having seen for themselves the abuses and what happens to Palestinian children. And as I think Dean mentioned, the conviction rate for Palestinian children when they're detained by the military is 99%. 99%. So, I mean, you have to say, how is that possible? And how could that possibly be just? And often the convictions are for things like stone throwing, and often that's because of confessions they're forced to sign. So, but I think it's also important for people to understand these videos include interviews with our national leaders. And because one of the things that's at stake is we as the US citizens, why should we care about this? Well, we're complicit because of the support the US government gives to Israel and how much of that is used for the weaponry. In particular, I'd say, for example, the tear gas canisters. I've been there when there was an attack on the people of Nabi Saleh. I observed that the tear gas canisters that were used, they're made in Jamestown, Pennsylvania. So that the question of our complicity is also a key part and a reason why, as people of faith, we need to understand what's happening. We need to advocate for justice and for peace and for equal rights.
Thank you, Allie. I want to give each of you sort of a chance to say anything else you want to. We put the link up on the website for how to view the film. And I want to give you all a chance to make any final comments that you might like to make regarding How Are the Children and this video that the PIN Network has produced. So let's start with Nancy. Would you like to summarize or have any last thoughts for our viewers?
Yeah, I just want to add sort of piggybacking on what Allie just said, that one of the reasons that we particularly feel engaged in this work as the UCC Connecticut PIN, and also we believe that our churches need to be compelled in the same direction, is that we've actually been directly asked by our Christian siblings in Palestine for help. Not as a direct request to each of us as individuals, but the church in Palestine reaching out to the church in the US. And I believe that for us to ignore that, for us to put it as sort of a second-rate request, or for us to even fail to see the connections between our own failings as a country and the allyship that we have with Israel, is to really fail in our discipleship. So I think we have an opportunity here to cross so many bridges and to work together. And just to reiterate that I feel compelled by that request from the church in Palestine, and wanted to share that. Thank you, Nancy. Dean, any last thoughts?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention was we are not on our own in this or in this experience and sharing this information. I was impressed in the video that there are at least 3, but more than 3 organizations who have explored this subject, researched this, done their homework on what's going on there. One of them is B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization. The other is UNICEF, and Defense for Children International Palestine, and they've all, on their own, investigated what's going on and all come to similar conclusions about what we've discussed during this time together today. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize is that in the video itself, there's a story about a young girl, and this young girl experienced seeing her mother shot in the leg, and subsequently, and I believe this is the family actually that Allie knows, this young girl was then later, the soldiers came into her house. As a teenager, she responded by slapping one of them and was going to be sentenced to 3 years in prison for that, and wasn't, because of the number of voices around the world that chimed in on her behalf and in her defense for what she had experienced as a child. And so I share that little part of the video because it emphasizes to me that our voices matter, that our collective voices in the United Church of Christ, but also our fellow Protestant denominations and voice for peace and all of the organizations that have come together with concern for justice in the state.
Allie, last word.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dean, for raising that, because advocacy is really critical. And I want to name a couple of things. One is there actually is legislation in Congress. It was introduced in the last Congress. It's going to be reintroduced by Betty McCollum from Minnesota, which is about the rights of Palestinian children and calling for withholding of U.S. funds so long as those rights are being violated. And that's a really important opportunity for advocacy. In addition, as Nancy mentioned, there is a Connecticut, UCC Connecticut pin. There are several regional pins now that have been developed across the country, and we have one in Connecticut. And I want to reiterate that there will be an event we're hosting for clergy and religious educators, really for anybody, that's going to be held at the Palestine Museum April 30th, where we will be introducing people to the video, to the whole campaign of how are the children, the opportunities for study, for contributing, for advocacy, and also introducing people to the museum. It's the first Palestine museum in this country, and it's right here in Connecticut. It's in Woodbridge. It's amazing. So that's an opportunity. The other thing is, for anybody who's going to Super Saturday, Gay Harder and I are going to be doing a workshop on how are the children. And lastly, I just want to reiterate what Nancy said about being compelled to do this because of our faith in response to the appeal from Palestinian Christians in the Kairos document who named the occupation as a sin and really called us to be engaged in resisting and working against that, informed by the logic of love, which is at the heart of our faith. And so for that reason, in response to our Christian siblings in Palestine, and because of the complicity of the U.S. because of supporting this terror, really, we need to be active and advocating, and that's what this curriculum is designed to help people engage in that.
So I want to thank our three panelists, Nancy, Dean, and Allie, for bringing this information to us through this medium. The video is called How Are the Children? And there are links on both Facebook and the Zoom link so that you can access the video yourself. Lots of resources, places for you and your congregation to check out, and for others who are interested in the topic. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your work, and blessings to all of you.
Thank you, Kent.
Thanks, Kent.
Thank you.